Uh, so the way we're going to do this is Patrick's going to present first on the legislative session, and then Alfonso will talk, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. If you have a question that you want to ask, please put it in the chat, and I will be responsible for feeding questions to Alfonso and Patrick. I'll try to accommodate as many questions as we can do. That inevitably means that if two people ask the same question, I'm going to ask that one question, not two questions. So please, everyone, mute themselves, and I think we're ready to go.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. How long do I have, Richard? Because I know there's another meeting for some of the Barcroft folks. Maybe about 10 minutes?
10, 15 minutes, we fine.
Okay. All right. That's good. So thank you for having us. It's great to see everyone. I wish we could do this in person, and hopefully soon enough we will. The news from across the river with a great president sounds like we're going to get the job done, and people are going to get shots, that vaccinations, and hopefully things will be getting towards back to normal. My kids are starting to go to school next week, so things are starting to change. But I got to tell you, this was a pretty consequential session. The special session that we had over the summer into the fall was quite consequential, but then again, so was the session of the 2020 session. And we're just continuing to build on that. And so I'm delighted to talk to you a little bit. I'll talk to you about some budget issues. We passed an incredible budget and also some criminal justice reform issues, and Alfonso is going to pick up some of the rest. But as you know, the economy is not great for everyone. There's a lot of people in Virginia that are struggling due to COVID, and it's really important that we recognize that. But also, our economy is quite strong for those that do have jobs, and the businesses continue to be operating. Unemployment's relatively low still, and in spite of what some people are suffering, our economy is still doing quite well. And the governor was able to put aside an additional $730 million that we could add towards the budget. And so we prioritized a lot of those items for where that money was going to go. And we're happy to report that there's going to be pay raises for teachers and state employees at 5%. State police are going to receive an 8% bonus. We're going to add $466 million, almost $500 million of new money in through K through 12. Some of that money is going to go to increasing the ratio of counselors. So we're going to have 1 to 325 students, one counselor per 325. And here for Northern Virginia, we put some resources towards the cost to compete adjustment. In healthcare, we're putting an additional almost $200 million in new money into healthcare, really focusing on prioritizing nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Obviously, COVID has really shined a spotlight on some of the inadequacies of care in our nursing facilities. That's really congregate settings is really where a lot of these outbreaks, more than half the outbreaks that we've had. And so putting more funding towards attendance, more funding towards the auxiliary waiver, which is what is relied on in assisted living facilities, is what they're doing there. In terms of COVID, a tremendous amount of money, both state and federal money, thank you to the CARES Act, about $90 million is going to go towards our mass vaccination efforts that we have underway, and also disease surveillance, investigation, testing, and contact tracing. So there's going to be adequate resources as we roll all of this out to be ready for once we get the vaccines, we'll be able to move pretty quickly. I think the latest was it's somewhere in the single digits as to how many people have been fully vaccinated in Virginia. And think about what President Biden said, that every adult who wants one by the end of May will be able to get a vaccine, be fully vaccinated by the end of May. So just think about that, just in a couple of short months, how much we're going to need to go. So I would imagine this is really going to start ramping up the distribution of the vaccine, which is really a good thing. Alfonso, you'll probably talk about the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but we put a tremendous amount of money into the Housing Trust Fund, recognizing, of course, that a lot of people need support especially for rent relief. We put a lot of money down for a lot of customers, a lot of Dominion customers having need some utility relief. We're putting an extra $90 million in for relief for families that have been delinquent in their payments. You obviously can't turn off the electricity ever, but in the middle of a pandemic is really bad. Putting additional resources toward transportation. A big part of that was WMATA. If you've been following the news lately with WMATA's budget, just on the Orange Line, they're talking about closing a couple of stations, which would be devastating, frankly, to a lot of our constituents who depend on these stations to get to and from work. And so we put a significant money down for payments to WMATA as well. On the judicial side, we put some money in to expand the size of Court of Appeals from 11 judges to 17 judges. Right now, I mean, most states do this. Right now, when you get sentenced in circuit court, you really don't have a right to repeal anymore because we just don't have the judges to appeal them beyond the circuit court level. This will give people access to the Court of Appeals by expanding it to from 11 to 17 judges. And we'll start that. So the funding's in place for that. And we will start interviewing candidates to expand the Court of Appeals probably in the next month or so. Hopefully do it in time for the reconvene session. If not, we'd have to call a special session to approve those judges. But that's a really exciting time.
Patrick, about the appeals court judges, can you touch upon the fact that we will have for the first time an appropriate number of Northern Virginia judges on the Court of Appeals?
Yeah, we don't have not a single person on the Court of Appeals right now. Jane Roush was our last one. If you remember that fiasco with Jane Roush, they plucked her from the Court of Appeals and put her on the bench for the Supreme Court, and Republicans came back in session and took her off. And so she was basically without a position. So she was our last person and only person from Northern Virginia. And so we're going to finally get equal representation regionally on the Court of Appeals. And so that's a very good point, Alfonso. So we're going to have probably 3, maybe 4 judges from Northern Virginia. So that's going to be a nice little balance there. So let me talk about some of the criminal justice reforms because there's so much that has been going on. Probably one of the major victories, I guess, there's quite a few of them, but the major one is repealing the death penalty. Virginia has executed more people in our state's history than any other state in the country. And by a proportion of more than 3 to 1, Blacks have been executed over whites by a margin of more than 3 to 1. We're the first state in the South to fully repeal and abolish the death penalty. And it's a really exciting thing that's gone on. The other thing that we've done is one of the few states remaining that doesn't automatically expunge records for people that have either their cases have been dropped or dismissed. So we're going to have an automatic sealing of 9 misdemeanors. And if after 7 years, they can have that automatically sealed. And I'll read the different crimes that would be automatically sealed. Underage possession of alcohol, use of a fake ID, petit larceny. So these are larcenies that are under $1,000. Trespassing, disorderly conduct, possession of marijuana and possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. We can talk about marijuana in a second, but we're also on the track to legalize marijuana as well. There are some more serious charges, some more serious misdemeanors and class 5 felonies. You can go through a petition process that you would require a judge to sign off, but you'd have a position to do that as well. So since I mentioned marijuana, let's go ahead and talk about it. We have begun the process to legalize adult use marijuana legalization. So again, it's really emphasis is on adult use. There is still a crime currently of $25 for being caught in possession. So we've decriminalized it last year, as you recall, but we're on track to full legalization probably by July of 2024. There's a number of different other markers that they've put in place. We've set up a brand new authority. You might be asking yourself, why is it taking so long to fully legalize marijuana up until 2024? It's because we're setting up this new authority. Governor Northam initially thought that he wanted the ABC stores, ABC Alcohol Beverage Control Board to oversee the legalization of marijuana, to sell it and enforce and whatnot. And we've decided that instead we're going to create a new authority. So it does take some time to go ahead and set that up. It actually delays us at least another year. The other thing that they want to do, and they're very conscientious about this, is to make sure that those that can be eligible for licenses to sell marijuana, it's equitable. So we give not these big businesses the opportunity to go in. And you can imagine if we just flip the switch for legalization, that these big businesses would be able to go in and really control the entire market. So we wanted to give it some time so that we can have those that have been really the subject of over policing of marijuana, those minority communities have the opportunity to own a little bit of the process. Maybe it's a farming, maybe it's part of the distribution or the selling or what goes into it. They have an opportunity to be eligible and qualify to be part of it as well too. There will be in the future expungement of misdemeanors, and of course, as well as setting up this regulatory process. The regulatory process will start in July of 2023. One of the major things I just wanted to mention about this is the revenue that comes in. We anticipate that full legalization will bring in about $300 million every single year into the Commonwealth. And we've already set aside that money. 40% would be for pre-K and at-risk communities. So again, really focusing on where this revenue should go towards lower income and at-risk communities. 30% would go towards workforce training by over-policed areas. So again, we're being very deliberate about where we're sending the money. 25% would be towards substance abuse prevention. I really like this aspect of it. I got to tell you why. For years that we have been, thanks, Alfonso, for years, we've been really targeting the youth when it comes to possession and distribution of marijuana and making criminals out of them. Right. And so instead of under this new regime and structure, instead of them being criminalized, because it would still be illegal for someone underage, is that we're not going to emphasize the legal system. We're going to emphasize education and treatment if that's what they need. And so we're going to push money into substance abuse prevention as well. And then 5% would be towards public health. We've got some criticism, just in all candor, about not going far enough when it comes to legalization and making sure that people aren't disproportionately charged with crimes before we officially go on sale for July of 2024. I fully anticipate that the governor is looking at the bill and will make some recommendations for an amendment to the bill. I don't know exactly how far that he will go, but I hope that we are clearly on a pathway to legalize marijuana starting in 2024. The question is whether he can speed up any other portions of that in the interim. And I hope that he does, just between us, I really hope that he does take advantage of that power. The other thing I wanted to mention, which is also in the criminal justice space, we started the wheels in motion for a constitutional amendment to automatically restore rights of felons. And so that's been something, as you probably know, that a governor has had to literally sign to allow someone to have their rights restored. And now it will be automatic. And we're just one of the few remaining states that doesn't already have that in their law. We need it in our Constitution in order to make it work. So we've passed the bill this session. We fully intend to pass it next session, and then it would go to the voters in November of 2022 to approve. Some other things in criminal justice, allowing people to present evidence of mental illness on non-insanity cases was a bill that we passed. Ending the presumption against bail. Currently, if you are arrested, you have to prove why you should not be further detained while awaiting trial. And of course, it's completely backwards with how we all believe that you're innocent until proven guilty. So ending that presumption against bail. We did some things ending felony petit larceny. It's sort of like our own version of 3 strikes and you're out rule. If you steal 3 things, and you recall when we deal with the what creates a grand larceny, in other words, it's $1,000. If anything over 1,000 is a felony. Anything below that is just a misdemeanor larceny charge. However, if you do that 3 times, you could steal a bar soap 3 times. That third time, that third soap that you steal becomes a felony. And so we've repealed that. And many people that get convicted of this have serious mental illnesses, or they're homeless. And so we've eliminated that felony petit larceny. The other thing that we did was we created different degrees of robbery. Under current law, it's a mandatory 5 years for robbery. This creates different degrees based on the seriousness of offense. That's basically what the bill does. I'll go ahead and stop there. Alfonso has a lot more ground to cover. I just wanted to cover some of the criminal justice reform. Last thing I will say, one of the major disappointments, I think, for the session was actually on the last day of session, was we failed to get a bill out to fully repeal mandatory minimums. And we have about over 200 mandatory minimums on our books. And we got a bill that passed the House, and we got a bill that passed the Senate. We just could not have the conference committee reach agreement on what that should be like. But I have every expectation that that bill will come back. But all in all, a very consequential year when it comes to what we've put into our budget and targeted that towards our people who really need the assistance, and towards criminal justice reform. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Delegate Lopez.
Right. Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate that. And Patrick needs to be lauded for a couple things. Patrick is really our go-to person in the House Democratic Caucus for being an expert on public health and healthcare issues. And then also his leadership of the Public Safety Committee over the last 2 years has been extraordinary. Under his leadership, we have passed incredibly consequential, momentous, sensible gun violence prevention legislation that has completely changed the landscape in Virginia as it relates to gun ownership and possession, and the ease with which people can acquire guns, and including especially from people who should not have them. So, there were 7 major bills passed last year under Patrick's watch. We passed a couple more this year, including, I'm proud of one of mine, helping close the Charleston loophole in terms of extending the number of days that agents have to ensure that an individual who is possibly not able or should not be purchasing a gun can be prevented from purchasing a gun despite not having an answer from the NICS code system. So I'm proud of that. And also in terms of one other area that Patrick alluded to, for affordable housing in Virginia. I think people will remember that my legislation created the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund in 2013. And we had been desperately trying to get it capitalized at between $7 and $8 million a year. Well, in 19, we finally got it up to around $18 million a year, and in 20. But this year, the Housing Trust Fund that addresses homelessness, housing instability, and development of affordable housing infrastructure around the state was increased to $125.7 million. And it did not go further because we were able to get $524 million out of the federal government under the CARES Act. And so what I'm also very proud of is over the course of the summer, when we were working on in special session, and we realized that people, because of the pandemic, were incredibly susceptible to evictions. And first off, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that our social safety net is fragile. And so when the fact is that you've got kids who are not eating because they're not in school, you've got folks who are being maybe not essential workers or are essential workers who are being let go or having their hours or their money income reduced significantly, who are having food instability issues, they're having eviction problems. And so what we were able to accomplish was the rent and mortgage relief program. And I'm very proud of the fact they used the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as the backstop for that program. And so now we had a significant number of eviction moratoriums in the state, But now beginning basically a couple months ago, you have a program in place where the money is there to keep people in their homes during this pandemic, as long as you have a partnership going on and with landlords. And landlords are expected, there is a carrot and a stick here, and landlords are expected to ensure that they are assisting their tenants to remain in their homes, because we all know the worst thing that can possibly happen in the middle of COVID-19 is if people are on the streets. And so I want to thank the appropriators for what they did to finally get us to where we are just beginning to be in the game in compared to other states of similar size. But the initiatives that we put in place over the summer to ensure that people would not be evicted in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, I thought was a huge step in the right direction. So now I'm going to do sort of a catch-all with everything. And I think there are some people who have to leave early to go to the Barcroft School and Civic League meeting. And let me just tell you that I'm not offended at all. Yes, I'm offended. It's a bad joke. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Let me just get in the weeds a little bit. I'll try to move as fast as I can. We did a lot of the cleanup for work that we did initial steps on last year. In terms of protecting families, we're providing paid sick leave for home healthcare workers. We're restricting domestic abusers from purchasing guns. We're barring guns finally on Capitol Square and in state government buildings. We've created the Virginia Overtime Wage Act. We're protecting paychecks of minimum wage workers. We're including domestic workers in workplace safety and non-discrimination laws, finally catching up to some of our neighboring states. We've got things like the Virginia Agriculture and Food Assistance Program to address some of the food instability issues we're dealing with right now. In terms of keeping folks healthy, we've made it so that there's pharmaceutical drug pricing transparency. We've addressed some health reinsurance program issues. We're protecting midwives and maternal health data. And then we're also doing something that's incredibly important, is we're expanding broadband in Virginia. Just 2.5 years ago, there were 660,000 people in Virginia without broadband. Now it's around 340,000 because of the amount of work that this administration has put into expanding it. But just think, there are 340,000 people who are reliant on the internet to go to school, reliant on the internet to do their work, but they don't have like solid access to the internet and broadband. And it's not just the hollers of Southside Virginia and Southwest Virginia. It's Fauquier County. It's parts of the Route 1 corridor near Mount Vernon. And so this is not an issue of, other places around the state. It's an issue of Fairfax. And it's also an issue of the western part of the Columbia Pike corridor in some cases. And so efforts to make, provide cheap broadband service to folks, as well as just providing service at all, has been something that we've been working on fairly intently. Let me just begin also. We've started working on some public transit system studies that need to have begun years ago. We're looking at funding for improvements to major transportation corridors, including the possibility of bringing commercial rail to other parts of Southside and Southwest Virginia. Beyond the 5% increase in teacher salaries, we've also been doing a great deal in terms of early childhood education and restoring several initiatives that have been discontinued over the years. Also, something that's interesting, we've actually begun doing more in terms of cultural competency. So ensuring that teachers actually understand cultural issues of inclusion and diversity as they teach their classes. And so this is not just a Northern Virginia thing, it's an issue now for the entire Commonwealth. And it's a fairly big initiative as well. And then voting. Just like Patrick was able to say that Virginia is now the first state in the South to ban the death penalty, Virginia is now also the first state in the South to have its own Voting Rights Act. And so filling up the gaps that don't exist or that exist currently at the federal level, and making sure that all of the things that worked last year that we put in place and we're finally able to change, because Patrick knows as well as I do, the Republicans I don't want to get too partisan, but the Republicans were whittling away at the ease of voting in the Commonwealth, conflating voter fraud with messing up your registration forms on the floor, making it so you couldn't use certain IDs. You could use your concealed carry permit, but you couldn't use your university card as an ID to go vote. You couldn't use, you couldn't sign an affidavit if you showed that you had your utility bills. And so just making it harder to vote as much as they could. And so we put in place absentee voting, we put in place drop boxes, we put in place curbside voting, and we also put in place early voting. That by itself is a huge step in the right direction in terms of making it easier for people to vote in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And it's a very important step that we've taken, I think. Let me just also touch on a few things that I'm very proud of over the last 2 years. We have, I think, done a 180 in terms of how we address immigration issues in the state. I am incredibly proud of the fact, and the video will stick with me forever, but when I've been working, my family's been working since 1982 to get the DREAM Act for DACA and for Dreamer students passed in Virginia. And last summer, the governor signed it and it went into law. And so literally tens of thousands of students who weren't able to achieve a higher education because they couldn't afford it were able to get in-state tuition. And that, Patrick knows this joke, but I cried during my entire speech for 21 minutes, and I'm being consoled by the governor and the attorney general. And that video will stay with me forever of me basically weeping like a little baby because we've finally done something so very important. Well, this year, what we did was we actually took the next logical step and we included undocumented students and Dreamers and DACA students into and because they pay taxes into the state to be eligible for in-state tuition, they also now are eligible to get financial aid. And so we've truly made it an equal level playing field for undocumented students and Dreamer students who are just trying to get an education. And along those same lines, we were able to fix some problems in the state code. Folks, anybody here remember Dave Albo from Springfield? He passed a bill back in 2005 that said, and this is the language of the time, that no illegal immigrant in Virginia shall be allowed to have any access to state resources. Well, the problem with that during a pandemic is pretty clear, because if you're trying to do vaccines and testing and treatment for every community, because we are all interconnected, the idea of somehow not expending resources for undocumented folks, even though they might be tens of thousands of them in Virginia, is counterproductive for us trying to address the pandemic at all. And as you all know as well as I do, 9.4% of Virginia's population are Latinos. But Latinos made up 31% of all the COVID-19 cases in the Commonwealth. And you could have heard the screaming from Richmond of me getting into it with certain folks down in Richmond about how they weren't translating to Vietnamese and Urdu and Spanish properly. They weren't doing proper outreach. They weren't actually engaging certain populations in terms of testing. And now we are. Now we are. And one of the bills I passed was actually a bill to ensure that emergency Medicaid services will be used for individuals, regardless of whether or not they're able to pay and regardless of whether or not they're documented or not. Because every single person in Virginia has to be able to be tested, treated, and vaccinated. Every single person, because if we don't, we can't eradicate this pandemic. And so I'm very proud of the fact that that passed. I'm very proud of the fact that if everybody remembers the Purple Lounge on Columbia Pike, my legislation actually enabled the county and other counties around the Commonwealth to address criminal blighted properties like the Purple Lounge. And then also some other things we were able to do was in terms of voting rights, I worked with the young Republicans and the young Democrats to enable pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds so that we can help them make voting a habit of a lifetime. And then finally, the two things I just want to bring up. My legislation created for the first time ever, finally, the LGBTQ plus Governor's Advisory Board. We had never had that in the Commonwealth. Now we do. I was the chief co-patron of the constitutional amendment that was carried by Senator Adam Evan and Delegate Mark Sickles to overturn the ban on same-sex marriage and the Marshall-Newman Amendment. So I'm very proud of that. And then finally, something I've been working on for a very long time. Everyone knows my background in environmental policy and renewable energy, but we were finally able to get $800 million to address wastewater cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay, and so that we can meet our WIP 3 goals by 2025. And with that, we got bipartisan support on both the House and Senate side. And so the fact that we were able to do that, I think, is a huge step. It's one of those under the radar things, but $800 million to address Chesapeake Bay cleanup and make sure that we achieve our goals is, I think, a very important step. Last thing, I keep saying last thing, but here's the deal. Think about what we just did. I tell the joke that when we first came in the majority, on the second Thursday of session, we passed on the floor of the House Delegates last year all 7 of Patrick's gun bills, payday lending reform, and no excuse absentee voting within 2.5 hours. In the previous years before we had the majority, if just one of those bills had passed, it would have been a week of media. It would have been marketing and messaging. It would have been groundbreaking. For Patrick and me, it was Thursday. And every single day in the General Assembly, when we're in the majority, it's Thursday. And last Friday, we passed legalization of marijuana and a ban on the death penalty within an hour and a half of each other. Think about that for a second. What each of you did to help us get the majority in Virginia did that. It did that. It has fundamentally changed the Commonwealth of Virginia. Fundamentally changed in every area. And now we have to keep it up, because the Make Virginia Red campaign, led by this new group from Trump, because we're the first folks on the ticket, folks, this coming November, if they can pick up the governor's mansion or the House of Delegates, that sends the wrong message to everyone around the country and around the world. I've done 3 BBC interviews. They care about Virginia because we're the canary in the coal mine. We're the canary in the coal mine. So, Mary Detweiler and Rachel Halpern and Detta and Colleen and Laverne and Jean and Craig Hines, my hero, and Alice and Sangeeta, you guys did this. We got to keep it up, because the Republicans want to roll it all back. They want to roll every one of our bills back. They'll say whatever they can to win. We can't let them. So, what's the old joke? I'm the House Majority Whip. If you don't tell me to shut up, I'll keep talking for days. So let's hear the questions. I apologize.
Here's the thing that Alfonso are sort of living in. We're really living in a moment in history right now. It's really historic what's happening, and for us, you don't really realize it one bill at a time. It's just you deal with one bill at a time. But really, when you take a step back and reflect of all of our accomplishments, not just in this session, Think about the special session that we had over, September and August, and think about what we accomplished in the 2020 session. When you reflect, we're in the middle of some historic changes here in our Commonwealth of Virginia. And sometimes you lose sight of that fact. And so I just think it's what Alfonso said, it's a good reminder. You think about all the different accomplishments that we've had are going to have positive impact on thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of lives. And it's pretty outstanding when you think about it. There's some questions in the chat, Richard.
All right. So we already have some questions, and I encourage you to enter them into the chat for the next 20, 30 minutes or so. The first question that I'm going to pose to Alfonso and Patrick is, what do you see as the future of repealing right to work?
I'll start. I mean, obviously, I'm a big supporter to repeal the right to work. I do think that the majority of Virginians support us repealing the right to work. I don't believe currently it has the votes to pass, and so that's why you didn't see a big effort for it to pass in either chamber, because we did try it last year and it failed. Last session, I believe it passed committee, if I'm not mistaken, and it died in Appropriations Committee. I just don't think the votes are there in the House, and I don't think the votes are there in the Senate. But I do think that attitudes are changing when it comes to right to work amongst the legislators, and I do think that there will be a time that, in the not too near distant future, maybe it's next session, where we will have the votes to repeal right to work. And it's making sure that people aren't afraid to talk about it, because it's not some boogeyman. There's been this belief, even among some Democrats, that you can't be the best state in the country to do business and repeal right to work at the same time.
You can do both.
And we know that's right. We know that you can do both.
We can chew gum and walk at the same time.
We can be the best state and we can repeal right, and we can be the best state for workers' rights. I mean, and the thing that they do to look at those rankings for the best states in the country to do business, these are CNBC rankings. And if you actually look into the criteria of what they look at, what goes into that ranking, it has nothing to do with right to work. They talk about the legal environment, whether you can be sued. They talk about the taxes. They talk about transportation. They talk about education, the number of people that are educated, highly educated, or the different diversity of the workforce. We have all that in Virginia. That's why we're one of the best states in the country to do business. But we can also be pro-worker at the same time, and that won't hurt our ranking at all. So I just think people just need to stop being afraid of it.
Yeah. So I'm on Labor and Commerce. I'm actually I was on the subcommittee and the committee that voted for it last year. So I voted for it both times. And then I support the bill. I mean, I support the idea, and I would actually be open to putting the bill in myself next year. But I would actually quibble with the argument that we don't have the votes in the House to pass it. I think we do have the votes in the House to pass it in a different form. My issue is always with the dynamic between the House and the Senate. I think the Senate doesn't have the votes to pass it. And I think we can get it done in the House. But I also am trying to make sure that I keep the Democratic majority. And the only people up for re-election next year are Democrats and are delegates. And also, I am respectful of the fact that not every single district in Virginia is the 49th district. Not every district in Virginia is, South Arlington or Central Arlington or even Northern Arlington. I mean, a couple of our members won by less than 3 points. I mean, one of our members, Nancy Guy, won by 41 votes. That was with the Trump, tailwind. And so we have to be realistic about different dynamics and who is able to go as much as far as we can and who can't. And that's part of my job, is to make sure that we're counting votes and making sure that we have the votes to move forward. I think we do have the votes to move forward on the House side. My problem's on the Senate side. But when it comes to the policy itself, I've been trying to address right to work in some way, shape, or form. And I initially had an idea to do it via 6 bills over a period of time, as opposed to simply expunging it immediately. But I grew up 4.5 miles away from the Right to Work building, which is right on 4 Mile Run. And so, yeah. The fact is that I see a comment, no, we must be bold. I defy anybody in Virginia to say that the House of Delegates has not been bold over the last 2 years in moving us in huge directions forward. And it's the old joke that Tim Kaine used to say to me all the time. The perfect is the enemy of the good. I know it's a truism, but it also it means a great deal in legislative politics. And if you're able to, in a legislative transaction, to get 75% of what you want, that's a huge step forward. We've gotten for labor, my bill actually overturning the Comstock rule on project labor agreements. So we actually allowed to have project labor agreements in Virginia again, collective bargaining, worker protections, and an increase in the minimum wage. Any one of those by themselves is an immense, huge step forward. Do we want to get to right to work? Yes. Are we going to get to right to work? Yeah. Are we going to get to getting rid of right to work? Of course we are. We just have to be. We have to have the messaging. We have to have everybody moving in lockstep in the same direction at the exact same time.
All right. Thank you, Patrick and Alfonso. The next question comes from one of our participants, and she wants to know why did police officers get a bigger pay raise than school teachers?
I'll tell you what I know. I mean, this was an appropriations thing. What they had said was everyone got the base raise of 5%, and they know that state police are underpaid when they're compared to their federal colleagues, and so they needed to get their raise, their salaries up to closer to that, because they keep losing state police to other agencies, and so that was the reason why it's larger. But
Right.
that's at least that's what we were told.
Yeah, and you do have an issue with retention rates for state police officers who are being trained by the state police, and then they're leaving to go work in Fairfax or Arlington or other parts of the state, or going to the federal government. So yeah, we do have an issue with the number of state police and sort of not having enough state police officers, and it's mostly about the pay inequity issues.
All right. So the next question is, how have we been able to use the state healthcare system to accommodate the COVID pandemic, and particularly whether either of you see a future for Medicare for all?
Well, I mean, I'll take the last part of that question. It has to be Medicaid, because that's the program that the state covers. And I chair the Joint Commission on Healthcare, which we've actually made this a priority. We've been sort of agnostic about the approach that we get. We first set up with the premise that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. And we want to expand more health insurance, health access and coverage to more people. One of the things we are looking at, right now, Medicaid covers up to 125% of federal poverty. We want to tap that up to 200% of federal poverty. That's something that we're looking at that would bring in quite a few more people into insurance. We were also setting up our own state exchange. That will take another year or two. But once we get control from the federal government on the state exchange, that will also bring down the costs and have more options for consumers, so that make insurance more affordable. I would love to lead on a message that we're going to insure every Virginian through Medicaid. And you got to quite understand the Medicaid program. There's no difference between a Medicaid option and a managed care option. They're operated by one and the same. If you have the Blue Cross version of Care First here in Arlington, Care First is also the Medicaid managed care plan. Anthem runs all of that in our state. for the most part. About 80% of our Medicaid's run by them. So all of managed care. So there's a distinction without difference. So I would love to get to a point where we insure everybody. And I can tell you the Joint Commission is going to come up with a study and a recommendation over the spring and the summer. And it's hopefully something that we can take to the legislature in 2022.
And with regard to the COVID-19 rollout, I think you have seen the issue that we've had initially has been about the availability of vaccines and having the vaccines get to the Commonwealth and get to the certain distribution centers in the Commonwealth. And what the VDEM and VDH are doing right now, Virginia Department of Health and Virginia Department of Emergency Management are doing right now, is addressing the problems we have with South Side, Southwest, rural parts of Virginia, and some places like Petersburg and Hampton and Norfolk and some of the larger cities. And that is putting in place mobile vaccination units. They're called, FEMA's calling them Type 5 mobile vaccination units. And that then can go around and distribute 250 to 3,000 vaccines a day in different parts of the Commonwealth. And then can reach these communities. So not every community has, a high school auditorium that can accommodate everything that needs to be done in terms of vaccinations. What you want to do is you want to bring the vaccinations to the people where they're at. I mean, we all know the facts. I mean, you've got some people in Southside, Southwest Virginia who live 100 miles away from the closest DMV, or 2 hours drive from the closest DMV. It's about getting the vaccines to the people and getting it done in as simple and as equitable a way as possible.
Just a quick follow-up on that. We all know that President Biden said this week that we should have enough vaccine for every American adult by the end of May. Will we have enough? Will that mean we will have enough vaccine for every Virginian by the end of May? And when do you think we'll be able to hit 80, 90% vaccination rate for the entire state?
Well, I mean, what the president has said is that anyone who wants a vaccine will have one by the end of May. So distinguish that from people that may not want the vaccine. And you see different polls, and they run anywhere from 20 to 30% are a little skeptical. And there are probably higher rates that don't want it in the minority communities. And so we need to have a good messaging to make sure that they understand that the vaccine is safe and they have access to it. And I know we're making strides to make sure that they do. So I do think, and Arlington being Arlington, I do think that certainly by the end of May, I think we're going to have a high percentage of people. I don't want to put a number on it, but it's probably an extremely high number that are going to be vaccinated in Arlington, which means that a lot has to happen between now and the end of May for that to happen. There's going to have to be mass vaccinations that are going to have to really ramp this up. We put some funding in place to allow for that. We did pass a bill, an emergency bill, which means it went into effect right away, that would allow the training of retired physicians and healthcare practitioners to be able to administer the vaccine. But it's a supply and demand at the moment. And the supply we're promised is going to ramp up drastically. And this week they got about 60,000 doses of the J&J vaccine. And I expect big quantities. They're going to follow that from Moderna and the other vaccine, Pfizer vaccine,
right?
And to meet the demand.
Right, and so the new the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a real game changer, according to the administration, because what they were originally trying to do was to get us just to 50,000 doses being delivered a day, and now we're looking at 70,000 doses. So that means Virginia will be able to meet all of our goals, not by the middle of June, but hopefully by the middle of May.
And think about what that means for schools. I mean, as people get vaccinated, the community spread will start going down. And so there's going to be some people feeling a little bit more comfortable, I hope, because that spread will go down. And that's why that they've prioritize, starting with older adult populations and essential workers, because those are the people that tend to get the virus, and making sure that we can stop that off as quickly as possible. And I think that's why you're seeing sort of a slowdown.
And then to follow up on the follow-up, what do you think the school reopening situation will be like in the state by this fall?
You're asking us to pull out our crystal ball.
Yeah. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be a billionaire. I would assume that we are going to be in a good position. I think that with the vaccinations going out the way they are, and the time frame for everything, that we will hopefully be in a good position for schools to reopen in person safely in the fall. And can I promise that? No. But as this administration has done, and both the governor's administration and the presidential administration, we're trusting the science, and the scientists are telling us how to do this, and they're telling us how to do it right, and the implementation is following that guidance. So hopefully we'll be there.
All right. I have a question about whether you see a prospect for new campaign finance legislation in Virginia.
We had some great campaign finance legislation that was put forward this past session that unfortunately did not pass committee and then died in the Senate, actually. There was an easy one. We used to call it the Tim Hugo bill, that said you were not allowed to use your campaign fundraising for personal use. And anybody uses their campaign funds for anything but a campaign, it doesn't make any sense to me. But some people use it. There are no limitations on what you can use it for. Technically, you could pay for your kids' college education with your campaign funds. And Marcus Simon had a bill in to get it to address that loophole, and it passed out of the House, and then it died in the Senate.
Yeah.
So there are any number of things that we should be doing better in the Commonwealth that we're not.
We've got the study. Delegate Bulova put in a study that passed, but that was the best that we could do. Really unfortunate. There's really missed opportunity. Virginia has probably one of the worst, most lax campaign finance laws in the country. And think about low-hanging fruit.
And ethics laws. You can drive a Mack truck through our ethics laws.
Yeah. So hopefully something comes out of this study that we can implement next year.
I have a question about new funding for police training and hiring more community social workers.
Well, for the police training, we started that process in the special session that we had in August in September, and those all went into effect. In fact, this week, March the 1st. And so we had put some resources behind training for implicit bias and de-escalation training, decertification training. That was also part of the bills for banning chokeholds and banning no-knock warrants, requiring a duty to report or intervene whenever you see misconduct. There's some legislation related to civilian review boards as well. And that would be, require or allow localities to have a civilian review board to create some oversight on law enforcement. In some areas that I would call smart policing, one would be having the Marcus Alert, which would literally have a team of mental health experts that would go along with law enforcement whenever there's a situation that's maybe someone with a homelessness or serious mental illness, that you send out that team rather than a big law enforcement presence that could escalate unnecessarily. And then we did have some legislation related to demilitarizing police. But that was really our agenda from a special session over August and September. And it was largely all funded through that, which again went into effect this week.
How will the federal COVID relief package affect Virginia?
The federal COVID relief package that has finally been passed will be a game changer for shortfalls in local and state budgets. You've got certain set-asides in terms of just for the Arlington County School Board. They have a $42 million shortfall this year. $42 million. And once they're looking at getting $20 million just from this the Federal CARES Act to help address that shortfall. The Commonwealth of Virginia actually is in a good position budget-wise. We were able to address the 5% teacher pay raise because we actually had some of these shortfalls that had been in place for months filled and addressed by the Federal CARES Act dollars. So
Yeah.
Federal CARES Act dollars, I mean, I think it has, the worst thing you can possibly do in a crisis is do nothing. And the fact that you had answers for addressing national issues of food instability, housing, schools, infrastructure, PPP, everything, like unemployment insurance, and the U.S. Senate under the Republican leadership did not act from May until just this past few weeks, or like past month. It's criminal. It's criminal. So, the CARES Act has done a great deal for us, and we need to continue doing that approach.
Yeah, and I expect, with the latest reconciliation, the stimulus bill that hopefully will be passed sometime either this week or next. We remember I mentioned that we when I talked about the budget, how we had over $730 million that got into our budget. That's excluding the money that we are anticipating coming to the states and localities. And so we're going to be in a really good position to continue to distribute those resources. The legislature doesn't like to give up its priority or its authority over distribution of money. So I know the governor wanted that authority, and we didn't allow him to take it. So when we come back for our reconvened session, assuming it's passed by then, I think the appropriations are going to have some more money to distribute out because we want to keep our prerogative as controlling the purse strings.
And be aware also that the president is going to announce, I think in a few days before the State of the Union address, that he has an infrastructure bill on top of the Relief Act. So on top of this next stimulus package, there will be a infrastructure bill that will help address, countless issues in terms of transit, transportation, port authority issues that have really gone unfulfilled for the last year. And that's a game changer in terms of jobs and real stimulation to the economy.
Yeah, think about Metro.
Yeah.
Huge.
All right. This will be the last question, so I'm going to bundle a few things together, which are, what would you point out to your typical voter as the outstanding accomplishments of the session? What are you most worried about Republicans rolling back if they get elected? And what's the agenda for next year should Democrats maintain control?
Jeez. All right. For this session, I think it's part of a 3-year plan. Medicaid expansion that provided health care for 500,000 individuals, including 5,600 people just in the 49th House Delegates district. I think overturning the, all of the anti-immigration issues that have plagued Virginia for decades. Patrick's work on sensible gun violence prevention legislation, the fact that we've addressed so many social safety net issues that have been, like from temporary assistance for needy families to everything we've been trying to do on vaccines and housing and eviction protections. The amount of work that we've done in terms of labor and protections of workers. And I think the other big thing is from an environmental perspective. Our passage of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, coupled with RGGI, coupled with everything we did on hazardous waste, everything we've done on environmental justice, has taken us from being one of the worst states in America when it comes to renewable energy and the environment to arguably one of the top 5. And so we have seen in just 14 months a fundamental shift in how we think about the environment and renewable energy in Virginia. And that is a huge step in the right direction. What do I think the Republicans are going to roll back? Patrick's gun bills. Patrick's gun bills and every single one of those bills that have gotten us to be a normal state when it comes to how we address gun violence and gun purchases will be rolled back almost immediately. Every single one of my bills on de-icing Virginia, on protecting immigrants, on in-state tuition, that is low-hanging fruit for the Republicans. And when it comes to priorities, budgets are moral documents. And the fact that I've had to go begging for years to get $7 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and now we're 125.7, you know what's going to happen in the next budget? It's going to go back to 5 or 6, you know? And it's about priorities. And so when you think about what'll get rolled back, think about how much money is going to go back into the coal field tax credit, how much money is going to go back into corporate giveaways, how much money is going to go away from the social safety net. And so you can see hundreds of millions of dollars moving away from Chesapeake Bay cleanup to a corporate giveaway. And so, you know, how long you got? I can list, you know, dozens of areas where the Republicans are going to immediately try to kill everything we've done. And I can say that, you know, they're already trying to tell the world that we've made Virginia unsafe, that we're going to let, you know, murderers out on the streets. And then we're making you less safe because you can't buy a bazooka to protect your farm, you know? So the messaging we're already hearing, but we could go on for days about what the differences are between the parties. So when people say, oh, there's no difference between the Republicans and Democrats, horse hockey. Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say everything that Alfonso said is actually right on. I'm worried about the criminal justice reform and the police reforms that we put into place. But so you asked the question, what's at stake? I'd say everything that we've accomplished. I mean, logistically, they have a hard time with the Senate still being Democrat. But you know, it's really important that we keep the governor's mansion as well. And so, you know, everything is at stake, absolutely. And everything Alfonso said is what's on the table.
Patrick is so even keeled, and I'm like, the world needs to be changed. You know.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alfonso and Patrick. Thanks to everyone who attended. Thanks to Rachel, who managed the technical side of this session. And thanks for everyone who asked a question, and also thanks to everyone who just listened. So just a reminder to the precinct captains from our area that we are having a Zoom on Monday the 15th at 6 p.m. So mark your calendars so that we can talk about some of the stuff that's coming up this year. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
We've got a great delegation. Thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for supporting Patrick and me and everyone else. Appreciate it, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Great evening.
March 15th at 6 o'clock. March 15th at 6 o'clock.